Okay, let's get into today's discussion. I want to introduce our 5 phenomenal panelists. We have Scott Baumgarten. He's the Senior Vice President, Agency Leasing at Transwestern. George Forristall, Director of Real Estate Development at Mortenson. Cullen Mahoney, Vice President at Trammel. Thomas Maynard, Vice President, Business Development at GPEC, and Rodney Riley, Director of Acquisitions and Development at Caliber Companies. Okay, we're going to start today with George and Mortenson. George, as Director of Real Estate Development, he is responsible for strategizing, sourcing, and financial development opportunities in Arizona, serves as a strong advocate for Mortenson services throughout Arizona communities. So George, let's kick it over to you and just talk about what you're seeing from your perspective now.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I appreciate that. I would say that, we're still in it and it's a bit murky and there's no game book to what we're going through. But I do think that preferences are starting to emerge. We essentially took the way business was done for 150 years and overnight threw it to the side and went to a virtual environment. And I think that there are some knee-jerk reactions initially on that the office was dead. But now that we've been in it for a little while, I think that we're starting to see some trends and we're starting to see some preferences. Companies did make a big investment in technology. And more importantly, that we were forced to use that technology. Several times we have these kind of launches and the technology doesn't really take hold. But since we were forced to use it, and in addition to that, kind of the bureaucratic barriers from working at home were kind of torn down in a day as well. And so collectively, we all learned together how to and fumble through and how to use technology at home. But now with more time and thoughtfulness, I think it's clear that we have reached a tipping point, that we are comfortable using video platforms, that we are comfortable from working at home, but there are some limits to it. I think that we've discovered that working from home is a very defensive mode of work. And for the continuity of business, we need to be in an office mindset as well, offensive at the office, I should say, offensive mindset. And by offense, I'm really referring to culture, to onboarding, to ideation, to collaboration, mentoring, business acquisition, and creation. Those things are just really, really difficult to do when you're doing it fully from a video or at home type work environment. So I think that, initially or essentially, Eric, is we're going to see the proof when a vaccine comes and how much we get back into the office. But I do think that there's going to be a large scale movement back into the office to a flexible office. But employees and our team members are going to start to say and see what is the environment that I'm working in and really take a look at it. They've had a break for, 8-9 months by the time we get back into the office full time. They're going to take a look around and say, hey, do I really like doing this commute? Do I really like the environment that I'm working in? What is the the air quality that I receive? What is the filtration of the air that I have? And I think that's going to force a lot of landlords and developers like ourselves to really take a look at what we're doing. It's going to drive lead. It's going to drive well building. And I think it's going to drive just us creating more and better healthy buildings in the right location for the team members to join.
Yeah, George, thank you so much for that. We have a ton of questions coming in that have been, submitted earlier that, you're gonna hit the nail right on the head. I'll bring you back in for Q&A in just a few moments, but I want to bring in Cullen Mahoney now. Cullen is Vice President with Trammel, the Phoenix business unit. Since joining TCC in 2014, Mahoney has directly managed or has played a key role in development of over $350 million of institutional real estate across Metro Phoenix. He has experience that spans multiple product types, including office, industrial, multifamily, mixed use, and land. Cullen, thank you for joining us this morning. And just similar to how George shared his perspective, I know we're all interested to hear yours.
Yeah, thanks, Eric, and happy to be with everyone today. I think it'd be helpful. Let me just give a quick overview of the company. We're a national development firm. Currently, we have $13 billion of development in process across the country, and that includes about $4.5 billion of office development. I'm based in Phoenix. I'm focused on sourcing and executing new development deals here. And locally, we have just under $400 million of development in process in this market. We're active in all the major food groups: office, industrial, multifamily, healthcare, and retail. And one of the deals that I'm managing right now is an office development in North Scottsdale. That deal is under construction right now. It's 175,000 square feet of speculative space. And when I say speculative, that means that we built it without prior tenant commitments. I'm also part of a small team within our organization at Trammel that's been tasked with trying to identify the key implications of COVID-19 as it relates to the near, medium, and longer term. And I would agree with the comments that George made about that we're kind of in it right now. But specific to our deal in North Scottsdale, we have done some things as a product of the virus. Specifically, we have adjusted our mechanical system to allow for more outside air. We've increased our filtration system, so a higher MERV rating. We're also going to be pursuing the WELL certification, which I think will be the first building in Phoenix to achieve that accreditation. And for those that don't know, it's really focused on testing and monitoring air and water quality in addition to some other key metrics. But the certification itself really takes the view of the tenant's health and looks at the real estate from the tenant's perspective. Other things we've done at the building, we've moved to completely touchless. So our lobby entries and the fixtures within our restrooms are all touchless. We've invested heavily in a testing and monitoring system. So our view is that it's one thing to invest the capital needed to have cleaner and healthier air and water, but it's another thing to be able to provide empirical data to your tenants that we think is going to be increasingly important. And then we're also looking at ways to kind of reevaluate our janitorial spec and building operations. When the building's complete, it should be done by the end of the year. So when it's complete and ready for tenant occupancy, first part of next year. So that was a list of kind of tangible things that we've done. But as George mentioned, I think that these are really just ways to make space healthier. And I think there's been a lot of debate and obviously no shortage of work that's been published on the medium and longer term implications of COVID. And you've heard things about a reduction in parking requirements, redesigning floor plates, shifting towards exterior loaded suburban product. And I think it's just really risky right now to move forward with any of those modifications because there really just isn't enough clarity. And there's a chance that there could be no significant changes to the workplace. But I think, focusing on just creating healthier spaces, healthier work environments is something that's not very controversial. And we think it's going to be appealing to all occupiers. Just real quick, some general thoughts on the virus. I think it's accelerating a trend that was already in place and flight to quality. And what I think that means is that tenants are going to be looking to occupy the best space in the best locations. And we were already seeing that pre-pandemic. New construction, which I'll define as product that was built after 2010, had a vacancy rate that was about half the metro average. And if you just focus in on new construction in the Class A sector, the vacancy rate was low single digits, adjusting for buildings that were built speculatively and leased up. You also had the strongest rent growth in that sector as well. So I think that's going to be a trend that's going to continue as companies and management teams start to move back into their space. They're going to be inclined to upgrade the space because of the signaling effect that they have with employees. Employees are going to be looking at their management team and saying, okay, this pandemic occurred. What are you doing to address this? What are you doing to show that you care about my safety and well-being? So I think that's going to be a trend moving out of this. And we're already starting to see it in some of the other markets that we play in.
Well, terrific, Cullen. Thank you very much for that perspective. I want to bring in Rodney Riley now with Caliber Companies. Rodney is focused on the acquisition and development of commercial property in a newly formed $500 million Opportunity Zone Fund. Rodney has significant senior level executive experience in all facets of the real estate industry, people, and projects. Rodney, thank you for joining us this morning. And again, very excited to hear your perspective now, as we have heard from George and Cullen.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity to do this. And I think echoing some of the things that George and Cullen just brought up is important to reflect on for sure. Can you describe this period as the great work at home experiment? And I think that's where we're at today. We're still in that experimental phase. We're not exactly sure what the solutions that Cullen just talked about are going to be the ones that people decide. I completely agree with Cullen, just in terms of flight to quality, as well as healthier is better. No question about that. But I think we can look back at some history and we can take a little perspective, especially given that I am quite a bit older than everybody else on the panel, been in the business for a lot longer. From my perspective, having gone through many, many downturns since 1986 and seeing the effects of these kinds of things, clearly, as George said, unprecedented. We haven't been here before. But there are some indicators that we can rely on. When 9/11 occurred, everybody said, I'm out. I'm never going to go back into a tall building. We know people are back in tall buildings. When I first got into the business, we were putting 4 to 5 people per 1,000 square feet into office space. Today, we're trying to jam in 7 to 8 people per 1,000. Well, if 30% of your workforce has now decided that they in fact can work from home, you're really just going back to that 4 to 5 per 1,000, and maybe everybody is back into a private office rather than some of the open floor plans that we're seeing. So again, I think you can rely on some things from our past to make sure that we're methodically taking a look at the ramifications of the decisions that we are making in the short term. And that leads to each individual office tenant that we can talk about. Sublease space is up. But is it up as a result of COVID? And I definitely have had stories from brokers in the market where the knee-jerk reaction early was, we're going to put everybody out. We're going to let everybody work from home. We're going to get rid of office space. And that was a knee-jerk reaction that some companies even offered their space for sublease. And I think I've heard more back up from that than move forward with it. We have to recognize that as interesting and maybe good as it has been for lots of people to work remotely, at the end of the day, most people get their socialization at the office. They find their spouses at the office. They find their friends, their football pools. Everything is associated with that work life in the office. And if we take that away, what are we going to do to those employees? And again, back to George and his comments, just trying to understand from a physical and a mental perspective what we have to do to make our employees happy in the future is going to be a big metric in the decisions that are going to be made here in the next few months, few years.
Yeah, Rodney, thank you so much. And I know just listening to you, some questions were coming to my mind. I want to remind everybody, since we do have a very large live audience, that Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, that's where you can submit those questions. And if we have time at the end of our discussion, we'll try to get to as many of those as possible. Okay, let's bring Scott into the conversation now. Scott serves as Senior Vice President and specializes in agency leasing for both institutional and entrepreneurial owners, investing in office properties throughout Phoenix. Before joining Transwestern in January of 2018, Scott's 15 years of experience have been focused on office leasing, value-add investment sales, land sales, and tenant representation, allowing him to advise clients across a variety of real estate services. So Scott, again, you've heard from George, Cullen, and Rodney now. Thank you for joining us this morning, and excited to hear from you.
Yeah, Eric, happy to be here. I think George and Cullen and Rodney all touched on all very important aspects. And I think one thing that we all need to remember is that this is a forced experiment. None of us would choose to have this great panel and great forum to do it over Zoom if we had the option to do it in person. And there's so much to gain from the socialization and the interaction that we can all have together. And so I think that's just a a broad-based, view of the importance of the office space. I think if you look at our market specifically, I think we are pretty uniquely positioned to rebound and respond a lot quicker than other markets, especially the larger urban coastal markets that have such a reliance upon public transportation. While that may have been a knock against our market to some degree, it provides great ease of access to all parts of the valley because we are primarily a car-driven mode of transportation. So I think when this all kind of the dust settles and everyone has a better idea of the type of space they want and the size of space they need to accommodate their particular business, we are going to be able to be more flexible and quicker to respond because we are not reliant upon mass transit. Now, when you look at what has happened to our market, we were, going 150 miles an hour and just everything was fantastic. While things have slowed down incredibly, the good news is the demand is on pause. The demand has not been terminated. So there are so many different companies that are, whether in market or out of market, looking to expand into Phoenix that still have us on their radar to expand into. It's just time will tell exactly when it is and how big it is. We've seen only a slight increase in the office vacancy. So, we haven't seen this crazy crater in the market. We've seen pricing actually go up. So that tells us a few things. One, owners are not overreacting to this immediate change into the office landscape. There's still demand for high quality office space. To what Cullen said, I think flight to quality and being able to attract, retain, and recruit are going to be even more important. So we've seen just a really increase in office pricing overall. And then if you look at the sublease space and some of the shadow space, it's been a pretty minimal impact to our market compared to a lot of other markets. So we don't have a lot of holes to backfill to compete with owners of office buildings that are trying to lease their space directly. So overall, I think our market is, while things are pretty uncertain right now, we're going to be best positioned to rebound out of this once there is a little bit more clarity on what office users truly need and want.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'm glad you brought up Phoenix and companies moving to Phoenix. That's a perfect transition into Thomas. Thomas Maynard has been with GPEC since August of 2013, serves as the Vice President of Business Development. In his role, Thomas has worked with hundreds of companies evaluating a relocation or expansion to the greater Phoenix area and leads the tech strategy for the team. Thomas was recently named to the 2020 list of North America's top 50 economic developers. And again, I think it's a perfect segue talking about, companies looking to move to Phoenix and pushing that pause button, but the demand is still there. So Thomas, excited to have you share your perspective with us.
Thanks, Eric, and happy to be here and happy to join this great panel. So before we get in, I'll share some slides on some figures that we pulled together just to put some additional context on what we're seeing as a market. So here you'll see kind of our market fundamentals from an office side. We did have, as a region, a pretty solid 8-year run there of positive absorption year over year. Obviously, with COVID, the counter, quarter two of this year was the first quarter that we actually, saw that reverse, which would seem to make sense based on everything that was happening in the world. This is obviously, consistent across metros. It wasn't obviously unique to Phoenix. We mentioned sublease space a little bit. That is something that we're actively tracking, and just to put some context around that, pre-COVID, there was, from our facts and figures, approximately 1 million square feet of a sublease space out there in the market. And today, that's sitting at roughly 2 million square feet of sublease space. So there's been a pretty significant increase of that. But to that point, and we'll get to this in a little bit, there are some groups that are actually taking advantage of that and using that as a way to expand into our market even quicker. So we're going to advance to the next slide to see what does our deal pipeline look like from an office versus an industrial trend. And again, these numbers will only look at groups that are out of market looking to come into the greater Phoenix area. We don't account for any in-market moves. But you'll see there, our overall pie chart of deals. And in normal times, this is probably closer to 60% industrial, 40% office. As you can see, our active deal pipeline in our year-to-date so far, it's probably closer to 75% industrial, 25% office. Part of the reason for that is our industrial side of the shop has been as busy as ever, and they're continuing to get a lot of new interest. But wanted to point out that we are still seeing a good amount of activity on the office side. You'll see there on the right the geographies of where these companies are coming from. No surprise, obviously California and New York are two big markets. There is a lot of international companies, believe it or not, that are evaluating their first U.S. expansion, and Greater Phoenix is on their list. A lot of those are, as Scott mentioned, are on kind of in a holding pattern, on pause. They're not, don't have the ability to jump on a plane and come out and really tour the market. We're seeing that from a handful of our domestic clients as well. Still interested in the market, still looking to move forward, but the missing piece is jumping on that plane and doing a market tour. We can try to do as much as we can virtually, but obviously a lot of companies do want to touch and feel the market. That being said, the next slide will show some of the announcements that we've been able to share during the COVID lockdown. So obviously Amazon is making huge investments across domestic markets in the U.S., including Phoenix. So they're going to have hundreds and hundreds of employees, up to thousands of employees on the technology office side, which is fantastic. Bright Health is a group out of Minnesota that took advantage of a sublease opportunity in Tempe. So they are moving in, or have moved in and started operating there. And then Robinhood and Zoom are two interesting use cases, kind of unique to our situation now, where they've publicly made the announcement that they are expanding here, and they're starting to hire talent here in Greater Phoenix, but the physical real estate decision is still on pause. And I'm generalizing a bit, but basically what we've been told from these groups is their return to office is still in play nationally and internationally. So that's the same case for here in Greater Phoenix. So they'll make their decision sometime. The marker used to be Labor Day of when they would think that they would make their decision. We've obviously blown through that. So maybe Q4 this year, early next year is kind of what we've been told. But the good news being that there's going to be some pent-up demand from these groups that need to get back to the office when it's safe and the all clear is sounded. So from there, happy to answer some questions. I know we'll go through some moderated questions, but that's kind of what we're seeing at a high level from our end.
Yeah, perfect, Thomas. Thank you so much for that. And we have a lot of questions coming in, and I'll bring George back into the conversation. Thomas was just saying, talking about these companies that still have a return to play strategy. And George, when you first started the conversation, you were talking about that initial wave of, is the office dead? We're hearing that over and over again. And then one of the questions that just came in, all of us have talked about it's too soon to really tell what's going on, but we are seeing major companies like Pinterest and REI have given up the real estate. And many of the companies have actually said that their employees can work from home permanently. So do you think these are some indicators that show that this might not just be a phase? Like Pinterest paid $90 million to break their lease.
Yeah, my personal opinion is that was a knee-jerk reaction that probably happened too quick, and they're probably going to regret that in the long term. I do think, again, to my previous comments around offense and defense, I think you can sustain business in a defensive mode, and that's status quo. But if you want to grow and expand and onboard, continue your culture, those are all things that happen within an office. And there's going to be a desire to have that office space back. Again, I fully agree for, the next 6 months or until we understand and have a vaccine and have, the ability to justify a safe work environment where we're coming back at 100%. I can understand that. But the long term, if you look at the long-term play for these businesses and for them to grow, an office environment at some level is going to be required.
Yeah, and Cullen, I'm going to bring you, and I have a question for you, but I'd love your answer to that question as well. What do you think of what Pinterest and REI have done?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that a lot of what's going on is obviously trying to appeal to shareholders. And I think you've seen some of the largest enterprises in the country, in the world, that have made decisions about working from home. And that's going to send ripple effects where other companies, try to emulate what they're doing. But the reality is work from home has always been an option for companies. And yet that they haven't done that because there's value in the office space. And that's an opportunity for a company to leverage their real estate, to create culture, to attract and retain. So I think that, there's a lot of that happening. That's what's getting the headlines. But you've also seen Microsoft, you've seen Facebook, you've seen Amazon, you've seen large occupiers double down on their office footprints.
Yeah, and you were talking in your presentation about some of the design elements that you're not too sure about yet, but things that are going and happening when you develop new projects. And here's a question that I'll pose to you. Do you see companies opening up collaboration hubs throughout the Valley rather than having all employees come back to their office all the time? This would be a place where those working from home or working from the office part-time could have a place to meet and collaborate that is not in the corporate office.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of discussion around that. I mean, you talk about the hub and spoke model as well. And I think you're going to see some shift. I don't think it's going to be in different real estate per se, but I think you could see more flexibility and a shift towards more of a hybrid schedule where employees can work from home, maybe a couple days of the week. You could see some companies invest in a hub and spoke model where they have a central headquarters and then some regional offices. And I think that would benefit Phoenix. But I think you could see the office space turn into more of a collaboration hub where it's meant to be a gathering space, a training space, a culture building space, but maybe not have the private offices in the breakout areas. And that can be left up to employees to perform that kind of thoughtful work at home. So I think the office space is going to potentially change, but it's too early to tell if this hub and spoke or regional office is going to be what plays out.
Yeah, Rodney, what do you think about that? You were talking about the football pools in the office and the socialization of that, and the question coming in: do you see these separate hubs popping up, or maybe it is just reconfiguring the existing corporate office?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a reconfiguration, Eric. I think that companies are going to have to figure out how to socialize their employees. There are just so many examples of how well work at home works. But then there's other examples. At some point, we're going to have had enough of the kids interrupting you when you're in the middle of something really important. And right now, everybody's getting the grace for that, and it's just part of it. But I do think as things return back to normal, we're going to see a shift, and employers are going to have to be good employers and bring those employees back together to be able to socialize them. I'm gonna add one more comment to people vacating space, and I view that exactly in the same way as some people sell their stocks when the market goes down. Some people do. Some people hang on for the long term. George mentioned it. The long term strategy of employers and the long term health of office, very specifically here in Phoenix, is fantastic.
And speaking of that, I've got a question coming in that I will pose to Scott here. Talking about vacating, not necessarily vacating, but what do you think of lease terminations occurring in expensive property markets like San Francisco? Is that trend likely to continue? And then which of those second tier markets are really poised to capitalize on that flight? And that, we'll bring Thomas in as well for that question, but just want to pose that to you, Scott.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think what we'll see is, well, first of all, everyone needs to understand that your facility and your real estate expense is such a minor and small portion of the overall operating budget of a company. So when they start to experience that they can hire quality talent elsewhere, that the talent itself, the human capital, is so much less expensive than, say, hiring in the Bay Area or New York, Chicago, DC, wherever else these companies may be, that's where you start to see the largest shift. Will it happen in droves in the Bay Area? I sort of feel like it's happening already, but people aren't really talking about it much because our market's doing really well overall. But when you see a DoorDash who started in our market as a couple thousand square feet to kind of test things out, and then ultimately they're leasing a 350,000 square foot building. I think those are minor examples of companies that have already experienced how to be smarter about their real estate and kind of capitalize what Phoenix has to offer. So I think you'll continue to see it. This is a big example, but also everyone should also know that, for every REI and Pinterest, where REI gave up their brand new corporate facility headquarters, Facebook bought it. They already purchased it. So there's a lot more Facebooks and companies out there that need real estate, know the value of that collaboration and culture and socialization and everything that comes with interacting in person. Large companies have already done case studies and tests of the work from home experiment in large mass numbers, and it's failed, and they've all come back to the office place. So while our use of the office place is evolving, the office place itself is the ultimate kind of connection point that makes a company culturally kind of tick.
Sure. Thanks, Scott. And Thomas, same question. What do you think of that? These lease terminations in expensive properties like San Francisco? Yeah,
the interesting kind of metric to track, if you look at demographics and population, where people are moving, over the last 10 years, Phoenix has been at the top or near the top of that list of net importer of talent. And what COVID has done, now that everyone has to go into lockdown, there's these folks that would have to live in, and I'm specifically kind of talking to that young, tech type worker, that millennial and Gen Z talent. You'd have to live in a Bay Area or a New York if you wanted to work for one of these cool startup companies. So ASU has done a great job of producing talent. And this is one of the key stats that it can be a glass half full or glass half empty. ASU is in the top 10 of talent that Bay Area tech companies hire. So that means we know for sure that people are being educated here than moving to the Bay Area. What is being furthered advanced with COVID is now all these companies are virtual. So now they live in this high cost, expensive market, but it doesn't matter. They don't need to be, they're just going from their living room to their bedroom, to jump on a Zoom call all day. So now it'd be interesting to see, we're tracking this actively, is how many people are now moving back to markets like Phoenix, because they want to have a larger house or a yard or actually buy a house, which is not realistic to do in the Bay Area or New York. And I could guarantee in the next 6 months, if you look at the demographics and where our population growth is coming from, it's going to continue to be folks from New York, folks from San Francisco that are moving here. And to what was a challenge for our market maybe 10 to 15 years ago, maybe there wasn't a lot of these cool tech brands that were here. That's definitely not the case now. We are a market that is very attractive for these groups coming in. So if you are a recent grad from ASU, or if you're relocating here from another market, You know, it used to be you could go work at Yelp or maybe, you know, one of a handful of other tech companies. And now that list is, you know, 20 to 25 deep of venture-backed companies that are in high growth mode. So you want to do something new and exciting. There's plenty of opportunities here. So that's really going to be our opportunity as a market of how do we capitalize on that? Because we know, you know, the importing of talent is going to happen. So, you know, it's really the time is now to capitalize on that.
Yeah, thanks for that, Thomas. You know, you're all very accomplished leaders in this space, and I want to ask you a question about mindset. And Rodney, I'll bring you in first because you did talk about sort of the lineage there of things that you've gone through in the past. So what was your mindset like, let's just say in March when everything started to happen, and then we've peaked, you know, midsummer here when it came to COVID cases, and now things are starting to slow down a little bit. But just your approach and your mindset when all this happened, was this just, okay, it's another obstacle, we're going to get through this, or this is a lot more serious, unprecedented, major things need to happen?
Great question, Eric. And I very specifically had a response at the time, and that was, get ready, guys. It's an exciting, exciting time. You're going to work on things that you've never worked on, and maybe you never will work on in the future. You're going to think creatively. You're going to, this really does provide a bit of juice to the everyday work that somebody had been doing, no matter how experienced they were in their career. But absolutely what I learned over many downturns was that when that happened, if you started to get creative, from a real estate development perspective, it was a very, very exciting time. And it has been for me and for our company to really try to look out into the future, you know, huddle a little bit just in terms of making sure that we're making good, sound decisions, to be conservative through the terror that we read or we see on TV, and some of the stuff that goes up and down and can really cause emotional distress in somebody. And my advice was stay calm, be excited, and as it always is necessary in this business, run as fast as you can to the opportunities when you see them.
That's great, right? And George, same question. You know, what was your mindset back in March, and how has it evolved over the past few months?
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, we're Phoenix, right? I mean, by definition of our city, change brings opportunity, and I think we're well set for it. I've only been in the market for about 10 years, but I came in as we went through this last downturn in the market, and we are so much better in a position as a state and as a city and as a metro region to attack, you know, what is in front of us now. We have the amount of tools and resources and positive momentum that we have going into this pandemic is far and above where we were 10 years ago. So I'm really excited about the opportunity because last time we were fighting with one arm behind our back, and this time we've got two arms and another guy in the back to help us out. So we're ready to go.
Thanks, George. And again, lots of questions continue to come in. And so, Cullen, I'll bring you into the conversation now. Question coming in, where do you see speculative development heading over the next 18 months?
Yeah, let me start off by saying I agree with all those positive sentiments, because my sentiment on this question is probably going to be a little bit darker. But I do think, again, on Thomas's deck, he had Zoom touring for Office Space. I don't think that there's a better case study about the office space not being dead if Zoom is looking for office space. They've probably been the biggest beneficiary of work from home. But that being said, I mean, there are just some realities about speculative development, which is probably the riskiest thing you can do in real estate. And so I don't really anticipate much of any new development occurring over the next, 6, 12, 18 months. Obviously, a lot of this is tied to some sort of vaccine, but put that aside for a second. I just think that there's other kind of headwinds that are facing new development. And I think there's probably, maybe one or two deals that get done. And those are, build to suits or deals that were on the 1 yard line pre-pandemic, or just groups that can fund, call them high net worth groups, groups that don't need to procure capital from institutions. The way I see it right now is there's just too much risk for speculative development, and there's capital risk. You've effectively seen construction financing totally dry up. You've seen, speculative development equity that's effectively dried up. I mentioned a couple of the design risks earlier on. Those are legitimate. Where's parking going to go? Is suburban office versus CBD? There's a lot of risk there. And I think you've seen, demand risk as well. Leasing activity is down 80% this year. And the deals that are getting done are really short-term renewals and smaller deals less than 10,000 feet. So, from a market fundamentals perspective, there's just a lot unknown. It's super tough to underwrite deals right now. We touched on sublease space, and the different brokerage houses account for this differently. But the data that I'm seeing is, about 3 million feet of sublease space has hit the market. And that's against 2.3 million square feet of average sublease space over the last 5 years. So certainly could be worse, but it is elevated. And so as a result of that, I think you're going to see new development. When it does start to occur, it's going to be isolated to the best sites, at the best product, and with the best sponsorship. But just to kind of end that question on a positive note, I do think that we're going to be in a strong position when the market stabilizes. This is a totally different environment than the Great Recession. Going into the pandemic, we were at about 50% of the construction volume that we were in the Great Recession. Our house view is that vacancy rate's going to settle in right around 17% by year end. That's going to be up from 15% in January. It was 25% during the Great Recession. And I would argue that a 17% vacancy rate in Phoenix is pretty close to equilibrium. And when I say that, that means it's neither a tenant or a landlord market. It's just a balanced market, just because we have so much obsolete space that kind of artificially drives up the vacancy rate. And again, we're across our platform, we're seeing leasing starting to pick up. And I think it's just a matter of time before we start seeing that in Phoenix. But to summarize, I don't see speculative development taking place in the near future.
All right, Cullen, thanks for that. Thomas, you just heard Cullen talk about some of the trends in the sublease market. A lot of questions coming in regarding sublease. I know a lot of the panelists have talked about it. Any additional trends that you're seeing regarding the sublease market, and what will the overall impact be with some of the trends and some of the ones that Cullen was just talking about?
Yeah, the interesting piece of it, there's a lot of, obviously, the kind of the theme that we're getting from a lot of our clients. It's, they don't know what they don't know. They're trying to figure out what the next, 6 months look like. So they're trying to figure out all of their options. And what sublease space does is give them that flexibility that they can really enter in the market on a low risk profile and grow from there. What we are seeing that's kind of interesting, and I wouldn't necessarily call it a trend just yet, but there is I'll give you a specific example from a client that we're working with. They were looking at the market. It's an insurance company kind of looking for a back office type operation. Sublease was their main route forward because they needed to get moving pretty quickly. And the long story short, the building that they fell in love with in the region, the occupier that was initially putting it up on for sublease, since took it off the market because they internally were trying to play the chess game of, well, maybe we don't need this space today, but what does that mean? Are we going to need this back in 6 months, in 12 months? So Ronnie kind of made that point earlier. There's going to be some folks that are just going to sell and try to get out of the office space altogether. But I think the majority of companies are looking at it as a long-term investment, or if they have, if they're leasing the space and they're eventually going to add headcount and growth, maybe they do want to hold on to it. So that's one of the reasons why it's kind of hard to quantify exactly how much space is out there on the market today too, because there's some companies that are saying, hey, maybe we'll float this out there. If we found a great user, let's talk, but we don't necessarily want to fully put it on the market. you know, and from an economic development standpoint, you know, it's obviously great to see that companies are continuing to grow here. You know, so it's a good problem at the end of the day, but it's an interesting standpoint. I'm sure Scott has some points on that as well.
Yeah, Scott, you want to take that?
Yeah, sorry, I had a little technical issue there, and I think I missed the first part of the question, but I can tell what the question was. You know, I think companies in general, our market is not a pre-lease market from a speculative development standpoint. So it's very rare to have a project pre-leased before they even break ground. More often than not, it's well over 60% leased by the time it completes construction. So they get their certificate of occupancy. So it's always been a market that you've had to build it to sort of prove that it is going to come to fruition. On average, and this is kind of a rolling number, buildings that are in the planned stage where they're actively pursuing users, but yet aren't chosen, buildings that are continually planned sit on the market for over 5 years. So that shows you the confidence that the ultimate end user has in a project that's planned, because we've always had the supply of office space and spec office space that's been able to deliver and meet their demand. So that's on the spec development side. And I think people will be very cautious of building spec, but I think it will continue in the markets that have the metrics that meet the demand profiles of the tenants, which is location, access to amenities, talent, recruiting, and other building kind of systems that meet today's office user. On the sublease side, some subleases will meet that demand because they check a lot of those boxes. They might check 80% of the boxes that a tenant wants. And so that tenant might sacrifice a little bit of lease term flexibility for the immediate need and the immediate occupancy. So that sublease space in good locations will always lease just like a newly direct developed building will.
All right, Scott, thank you. More questions keep coming in. Rodney, let's bring you back into the conversation. I like this one. COVID seems to have forced us into a different mindset, into becoming much more reliant on technology to do our jobs efficiently. So put your technology hat on. Have existing offices become out of date? What do you think within the office world is antiquated and could be disrupted over the next 5 years?
Interesting. Yeah, clearly technology continues to be inserted into every building that we all have. We're all have always been looking at increased Wi-Fi connections throughout the entire building, whether that was common space or within the building. That trend has been going on for quite some time. Some of the other technology trends that we might get out of this, I think are generally yet to be seen. Specific to the health of the building, George brought this up right at the beginning, the health of the worker that's there, the technologies that can assist in that. What are you doing in terms of germ kill zones within HVAC systems that people have been playing with for a long time, and I think that's going to be something that's going to insert itself into every building moving forward. Clearly, that whole conversation about air quality and what else can be done. One of the effects of forcing more air into your HVAC is costs go up. So there's going to be a ramification of some of these measures that we can take today to the expenses that are associated with space. So will technology improve those kinds of functions within the operating expense portion of what we do on a daily basis. I think that's where building owners are going to be looking for sure. But clearly making sure if you're in a neighborhood that's using a lot of bandwidth, you've got a lot of people working at the house, you may see some effects. Scott may have been seeing that just because the kids are on playing games and downloading things, and the neighbors are doing the same. The neighbors are doing the same, which will affect your technology. So it'll be interesting to see what upgrades really come out of this.
All right, thanks, Rodney. And we've got about 7 or 8 minutes left. I'm going to try to get to as many questions as we can because we have a lot coming in here. George, let's throw this one at you. Do you envision Greater Phoenix continuing to grow out instead of up? And I guess that's literally, or is it going to go out, or are we going to be in skyscrapers?
So I think that we are going to see our core markets continue to grow. I think Cullen's statement about flight to quality is extremely accurate, and locations are going to matter, and it's going to be established locations. But I think it also is going to be driven by the workforce that you want. Again, I do think that employees that are coming, that you're looking to attract as an employer, they're going to be asking questions that they've never asked before. Again, questions like, what is the air quality in the building? What is the environment that I'm going to? How far away is it? Can I work from home? Can I work from home some of the time? And I think all of those questions are gonna evolve. And so I think we see a continued pattern in Phoenix specifically, where we see it both in the suburban and the urban markets, but the A locations are going to be the first ones to develop. And again, to kind of add on to Rodney's comment there, I do think that there is existing product in the market that is subpar, and I'm not sure if it can be upgraded to what we're going to see. And so there's going to be a lot more obsolete product in this market, and I think that we're going to have development's going to have to catch up to that to get the right product to the market to continue the expansion here. And that kind of leads on to the capital markets discussion, where Cullen was mentioned. I agree that speculative development over the next 18 months is probably going to be very slow. I think that capital markets are frozen across the board except for industrial, just kind of in a wait and see mode. Nobody's pushing them to make any bets right now. But over time, these closed-end funds are going to have to make some bets so they continue to get their yields. And those I think they are looking for, probably hoping some distressed product comes to market that they can make investments to that. But again, is that distressed product so obsolete that it doesn't make sense to take that product on?
Sure. All right. Thanks, George. I'll try to get this last question here, and Cullen, Thomas, Scott, really all would be qualified to answer this. What is your perspective on how international companies view Greater Phoenix as a first mover market in the U.S., and what sort of international tenants are you seeing? And Cullen, I'll let you kind of start with that, and then we'll go through the remaining panelists.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Eric, I'd rather kick it to Thomas. He's more qualified to talk about that.
Yeah, thanks. Happy to chime in. There's a couple of big markets that we get a majority of our office tenants on industrial or on the office side. One, it's a lot of UK based companies. These are fintech, other high growth tech companies that have launched their product in the UK. Then they're probably expanding across Europe, and then now their next step is to come to the US. We work with so many companies that are in San Francisco and New York that then relocate to Phoenix. San Francisco, New York seems to be like the default market for these groups. So what we're actively trying to do is get in front of them early to say, you can really skip a step and really just grow and expand in our market. We have what's called the Global Growth Accelerator that's in partnership with Arizona State University that actually allows companies to take that soft landing space in our market in a very low risk profile. And that's been pretty successful since we've launched that a couple of years ago. And then the other just key market that we're seeing a ton of activity is from Israel. Arizona and Israel have a close relationship. There's a trade office that's been established, and there's a lot of really cool and innovative companies that are coming out of Israel. And they're forced to move internationally because they, you know, from a customer acquisition standpoint, there's so much future growth opportunities domestically for them. So they need to expand internationally because we have a close cultural connection and you know, a lot of the research and development happening at ASU and others lines up well with the technologies coming out of Israel. That's going to continue to be a huge importer of companies for us. So yeah, that's probably going to make up close to 15 to 20% of our overall pipeline on a year-to-year basis. So we're excited for that.
All right, Thomas, I do want to transition now into final remarks here. And Scott, we'll start with you. What a discussion we've had. We've been on for almost an hour now. What are your final takeaways?
Final takeaway is we are, I think, closing in on a really, really unprecedented, challenging year that I think there's going to be some light at the end of the tunnel, especially for our market. Changes are happening. I think they'll all be positive changes as it relates to how people use office space. I think the big bright side is what's going to be revealed is office space is necessary. So,
thanks, Cullen.
Yeah, I think I would just add that you know, we're going to continue to see changes. I think Phoenix, the value proposition that Phoenix offers, the robust labor force and the cost benefits are going to continue to be attractive. I think the quality of life here as it relates to other markets are just those things that have always existed here are becoming more attractive. As it relates to office space specifically, there's going to be change. I don't think it's clear what that change is going to be, but I think it's a very low probability that the office is dead. Instead, I think you're going to see reinvestment in it and companies looking to invest in culture, invest in people. And as Scott mentioned, when you look at the cost of real estate relative to the cost of payroll and human capital, real estate is such a small fraction. So I don't see that going away.
All right, George, again, great discussion with all the panelists. What are some of your takeaways?
Yeah, I would just say that the office is going to become a hub and much less a second home. And if you think about that in the broader scale of if I'm in a coastal market and I could work from home with a home that I could own with a backyard, with a good quality of life, or I could be in a small apartment with high taxes and homelessness and all sorts of other political issues surrounding me. I know which one I would choose, and that's why we're here. And I think that's just going to continue to support the market and continue for the growth in the market.
Rodney?
Yeah, I am absolutely bullish on the office market here in Phoenix and obviously Arizona in general. Just, Thomas and GPEC, they've done a great job at being evangelists for what's going on here. We continue to see that California flight. I think, again, as I mentioned before, I think it's an exciting time to be in this industry, and change is inevitable. There's no question that it will. Whether that's technology related or not. I mean, my first office, first computer, fax machine, FedEx, all those things were new at some point. So we're going to see dramatic change, but someone will be foolish to bet against Arizona in the long term. We are poised to make some great strides, and I think the office market here is going to benefit greatly by the efforts of GPEC and all the people that are probably on this call talking about how great Arizona is compared to X, Y, and Z.
All right, speaking of the efforts of GPEC, Thomas, you want to close us out here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of just looking at through our crystal ball, we think 2021 is going to be a really productive year based on all of the pent up demand We know that probably right now there's boards that are having conversations of where do we grow, how are we going to return to office, and where's our headcount really going to be. So it's going to be our priority and our focus for Q4 is to really hit that strategy hard. We want to get Greater Phoenix on the map if it's not already on the map for these for these types of users. And Rodney touched on it. I think we all touched on it today. The fundamentals make sense. We have a great market. Now it's really our opportunity to share our story, and we're going to do that. And we couldn't do that without all of our support and without all of our members and all of our communities. So I want to say thank you to everybody, and we're looking forward to a great 2021.